this is a little diagram about the Scholar environment. Lots and lots of types of data that we're collecting in this environment. We've just showed you some parts of it. I was also going to just some final observations. I'll end with this, and that is that what we've got is, and Callie made this point, we've made this point, that knowledge is not just a matter of fact, it's often argument, it's often expert judgment, it's often things which are not necessarily straightforward. That also that we want to build these environments where we, by recruiting students to be part of the assessment process, we're actually getting them with rubrics to do assessment of each other. We're actually raising the bar in terms of what we're expecting them to do. So we're expecting them to actually give feedback using the sets of criteria that the instructor would have used. We're aiming to distribute that a little bit further. Also, this is an environment where intelligence is social. It's not just the product that I've produced, it's the feedback I've got, and I can trace the provenance of all that stuff. I can acknowledge peer contributions. That's the way knowledge is in the world anyhow. It's not just stuff that's in my individual head. But also formative assessment. So one of the themes here is whether it's machine-generated formative assessment or peer-to-peer formative assessment, this combination of things. And what I'm really interested in, this idea of what I call semantically legible data points. So if we've got the data points that a machine uses to decide something is a B+, are not actually, don't produce immediate feedback. How do we actually do stuff which can provide things which in many, many little data points give the student feedback which add up to their, adds up to learning, unlike the first diagram that Chase showed, which is, at the end the things get handed in and you get a B+, or whatever. But the other interesting phenomenon which we've been discussing, Duncan and I have been discussing, an old-fashioned idea which used to be called mastery learning. So learning is not about spreading the students across a normal distribution curve where you've got to have quite a lot of mediocre students and some failures in order for something to be good, right? That's the intrinsic logic. But also everybody seeing each other's first drafts, seeing good and bad first drafts, giving each other's feedback, and then those things getting published in portfolios and being quite public. So that everybody can, that one with the videos in it and the diagrams, you see model text along the way, and the aim actually is mastery, that everybody actually produces stuff which is more all the pieces are more similar to each other, and therefore probably the rankings become closer as you go on. So here's just some comments, but look, what we've actually had here is a variety of stuff, work in progress, where we've got some educational ideas, some computational ideas, and this idea about critical thinking in these professional domains that we've tried to bring together. So let's questions, discussion for at least, say, I know we're a bit over, 10, 15 minutes, then we've got lunch down the hallway in 192, to which everybody's invited. So, over to you. Sorry folks, there was more stuff here than we thought. Yes?
So is A better than B is very interesting, especially in our situations where like present a clinical case and we're teaching that they need to learn how to learn. So if what's more important is, like, say, if we ask them, okay, what's your next best diagnostic step, and provide A and B. And I mean this in a positive, non-negative way. Isn't that almost a more complex but more effective true-false question?
Yeah.
Is it true that A is better than B, or is it true that B is better than A? And so we're teaching them how to make decisions about options that they have in a clinical scenario where it's not cookbook, it's not A, B, C, D. We're teaching them how to go down that path of making, as I tell them, making rational decisions with limited information.
One of the points, though, is, I think Callie made this point, is about things which are comparable. So different answers which are comparable in terms of the order of sophistication of the response. So if the criterion is, diagnosis, prognosis, whatever it is, of a certain kind, that there may be responses. It's not just a matter of responses being, absolutely rankable, but things which are directly equivalent but different responses. Right? And that's the point I think you were making, Callie, about this. What's the phrase? Differential
diagnosis.
Differential diagnosis. Yeah.
Diagnostic differential. I've got just a question. This is completely different for Mike's and quite a bit more basic, but these are assignments. What do you do with your lecture time? You're given lecture time as well. Do you go over these in lecture, or do you actually still give lecture?
Yeah, well, in this case, what we did was we had these assignments were basically over 3 clinical correlations. With the first one, we introduced them to the concept. I basically modeled it in the classroom, how they wanted them to operate and how they use Scholar. And then the next one was when they were in the peer review phase. We gave them time to do it then. And then the last one was when I basically highlighted what I thought were the ones that were very accurate and the others that were entertaining. And I broke down, I broke my own rule a little bit, because the students, as you know, are always asking, well, what are the key points you're trying to get at? And it was, I knew I couldn't get back to every individual one before they actually took the exam, so I sort of highlighted, well, here's some physiological points or normal points about normal function that you should have picked up on in each of these, basically question by question. To the rest of the class, I flipped this class. I mean, that had nothing to do with this assignment, because this was scheduled around all of that. But I think we did, like we often do, the students drive us to do, is to say, give us a review on what the right answer is. And my first reaction was to them, you missed the point. There's not a single right answer. So what I try to do is to point out that there's, great, and as I review these, I try to point out when somebody's got a point that they've made that I haven't seen any other student make that's just brilliant. I mean, particularly for their phase. So you try to give them something to grab onto and keep being excited about doing this kind of stuff. But my concern is we do this in the first year, and we need to keep doing it somehow throughout the rest of the year. And we do. I mean, I'm not saying we just don't use the same systematic process, and we sort of always have had more problem-based in clinical path and more problem-based in medicine and things like that. But I'm not sure we've ever used come to the students and say, well, there's a real process about how you do this and do it right.
I guess that gets to my question. So how receptive did you find the students to this? Because I feel like every time I go into the classroom, even when I'm teaching third years who should be thinking clinically and thinking, how can I use this, for real, that they're very resistant to the idea of clinical-based assessment. I really appreciated your example, because I had the exact same experience where you present a case presentation where they need to figure out the differential diagnosis, and then the answer is quite obvious, and they can't make that transition, and then they complain about the question. But when you try and present the material in class from a clinical perspective, they fight it tooth and nail.
Yeah, well, I think I'll let Leslie answer that question in final, but I mean, we don't have the reviews back on this particular thing. I did ask for very specific questions to this, particularly because we took away what we normally have as a day 2 exam and a midterm. So this was their first experience with what I would call more integrated questions and complex, even though we don't get into case-based, let's put it that way. And as to whether, then fundamentally the question was, did this exercise help them prepare and think about the final exam? You want to comment on it?
Well, and I think it did, and I've been, I'm in a different position where I'm a clinical skills coach, so I talk more informally with the students and can ask them for feedback, and that's not my question, so they feel like they can talk to me more. Their like and dislike of the whole process has a lot to do with their comfort level at the process. If they're more comfortable with the process, they liked it more. If it really, really challenged them, they didn't like it. But yet at the same time, they would tell me, I really didn't like it, but I learned it. So I think if you keep at it, they'll begin to learn, because it has to be what they like, because this is what they're going to do every day, starting 4 years from now. Right? I mean, if you don't like it now, why are you here? That's exactly what it is. But their satisfaction with the process in Scholar also had a lot to do with the quality of their peer reviews. a bunch of people as reviewers were not critical. Great job, great job, great job. I mean, great job isn't helpful, right? There were one or two students who just were in a really bad mood or something and just thought everybody's work was horrible. And that wasn't helpful either. So if they were lucky enough to have gotten assigned to a peer reviewer who made an effort, it didn't take a lot of effort, but just, just glossing it over and saying great job isn't enough effort. If they took effort to give 1 or 2 points of meaningful feedback, then that student who was getting that feedback thought the whole experience of using Scholar was more worthwhile. Not all of them got that the reason we were making them do this was to prepare them for the integrated exam in which we do ask case-based questions. Because then they would come to me and say, oh, I really didn't feel prepared for day 2, that all those integrated questions, I didn't get what we were going to do. I'm like, well, that was what clinical correlations was all about. And I'm like, okay. They're just, but I think if you keep at it, it'll grow. This was their very first experience with it.
So I think a fundamental thing is what Callie said at the very beginning. Through undergrad, whenever they are conditioned, they're cultured to memorize and spit it out. And the biggest, I think, step is changing that, like you're talking about, and Paul and I do clinical talks, in a sort of a flipped way, and we do cases and then take them through it, and depending on how they answer the question, and they're in groups of 6, then it depends what slide, what they're going to see next. And they resist it the first class or 2, and then we start keep emphasizing, well, it's not to regurgitate, it's just to learn how to think your way through a class. Then I think they start, and that's what we got to emphasize, is that's what they need to start. You need to change, make a mental shift in their mind, how they want us to do that.
Yeah, I think what I try to do when I'm feeding back to them now, and it's sort of to say, you're going to get better at this. We didn't expect you to come up with the right diagnosis. We just want you to tell us what's wrong with this and what's not normal. And that's what we really want to focus on. And problem lists are absolutely central to what we do with them in the first year, because they're all about what's not normal. Normal isn't say that. And so I think most of the time, a real case, and this is what I think was probably happening when they were in the clinic, they're thinking that, hey, this is way more complex, and nobody's stopping, pulling me aside and saying, it's not that complex. What we do is very systematic. They don't sense that, they just think that there's this magic that occurs when they go into the clinic. And it's got to be done in a much more systematic way. They got to be talked to the doctor.